I'm Rita Frickel, a clinical dietitian here with the CHI Health and the Cardiology Division. And today we are going to be talking about how to shake the salt from your diet. So some of the objectives that I want to be reviewing is to kind of explore with you how sodium impacts your health, also to review the latest and greatest research on what are the dietary recommendations to help you feel better, and third, to talk about what are these benefits if you stay compliant with staying on a low sodium meal plan. As you can see from this little cartoon, there is the Morton Salt girl being busted by the FDA for peddling a hazardous substance. And indeed, as we will be talking today, sodium is considered a hazardous substance, especially for folks with heart failure. So you've heard from your physicians, I'm sure, many times that you need to limit your sodium intake. And let's discuss a little bit about what the health effects of excessive sodium intake are. So first of all, we always say wherever sodium goes, water follows behind. So when you have an excessive sodium intake, you will have excessive fluid retention known as edema. When you have that extra fluid on your body, your heart must work harder and pump harder, and that can stress the heart for folks who already have a weakened heart with heart failure. When the heart is working harder, this will also cause an elevation in the blood pressure, which, as you may know, may increase your risk of either stroke or damage to your kidney. So a little quiz for you to think about. Do you think that sodium is an essential nutrient for human health? Is that true or false? And the answer is true. Sodium is essential for humans. And in fact, it has several roles in the body. First of all, one of the roles of sodium is to regulate the fluid balance. As I talked about, where sodium goes, water follows. And if you have too much sodium intake, we talked about, that can cause that extra fluid retention and higher blood pressure levels. Another role of sodium is that it can help with muscle contraction. So every time you lift a box, that sodium is helping your muscles do that contraction. And finally, it aids in transmitting nerve impulses. So when you touch something hot or feel pain, the sodium is helping communicate that pain with the brain. So it is true, again, that sodium is essential in our body. However, a lot of people are surprised to find out that our body really only needs about 500 milligrams of sodium every day just to function and carry on the roles that it does. So, knowing that we only need 500 milligrams of sodium a day, let's talk about how much sodium is recommended for adults who have heart failure. So in 2018, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics published the results of a 10-year study. And in that study, they looked at the latest and greatest research to determine what is that ideal range of sodium for folks who have heart failure. And based on the evidence, it was shown that a range of 2,000 to 2,500 milligrams per day is the best goal or optimal goal for people who have heart failure. So knowing that you get 2,000 to 2,500 milligrams of sodium a day, I just want to show you kind of a busy slide, but it will make more sense as you follow along with me. As you can see, there is the dashed line that says 2,300 milligrams. And 2,300 milligrams of sodium is the ideal range for the average American who is healthy. So looking at this graph, the blue bars indicate how much sodium intake males are taking at each stage of a life cycle. The green bars represent how much sodium females are taking in. And as you can see at the bottom, throughout the various years of life, almost everybody is taking in excessive sodium in America. Again, keeping in mind the 2,300 milligram sodium is ideal for everyone, and you can see on almost every age group, most people are exceeding that. In fact, the average American is taking in over 3,000 milligrams of sodium per day. So that's something we should all be working on, whether we have heart failure or not. So what are the benefits of limiting your sodium to that 2,000 to 2,500 milligram sodium goal? So first of all, you will have immense improvement in your symptoms. You have experience with heart failure, you may have more tiredness or fatigue, more swelling or edema, and you might not be able to tolerate exercise very well. So once you keep your sodium levels down, continue to follow your doctor's recommendations for your medications, most people will have less tiredness, less of that fluid retention, and they'll be able to exercise better and have less of that shortness of breath. Another benefit to you is research has shown that when you have followed that meal plan of 2,000 to 2,500 milligrams per day, that you're going to be less likely to be admitted into the hospital with any of those symptoms. And also, following that meal plan and research has shown that there is lower rates of death for people on heart failure who follow that goal. So oftentimes people will ask me, well, what would that 2,000 to 2,500 milligrams sodium intake look like? So if we were able to convert that into actual table salt, 2,300 milligrams of sodium equates with 1 teaspoon of table salt. And I want to kind of point out, though, that that does not mean that you get a teaspoon of table salt to use in a day, because in the next slide we'll talk about sodium is in food naturally already. So it adds up quickly, and most people are getting the sodium they need just by eating food naturally without adding any salt. So one of the first things that your doctor has probably told you is we do not want you adding any salt at the table or in cooking, because you are already going to be getting enough sodium just by your foods naturally. So whenever you add just a dash of salt, an average dash of salt adds between 100 to 150 milligrams of sodium, depending on your salt shaker. So many people might add 2 to 3 dashes of salt at each meal. That means you could be easily adding 300 to about 500 milligrams of sodium just by adding table salt. So again, that is not advised to add any salt in cooking or at the table. So how does that salt or sodium intake add up quickly just by eating foods? So as you can see on this slide, we are trying to encourage people to follow the My Plate model. And that's what's shown here in your slide. So looking at your plate, you can see a fourth of it should be derived from grains, a fourth of it from lean proteins, such as your fish, your chicken, your turkey, lean beef. And the half of your plate should be derived from foods like fruits and vegetables. So if we ingest that food model, you will be taking in at least 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams of sodium per day just from getting the sodium naturally from the food. So to give you an idea, a cup of milk has about 125 milligrams of sodium. And we do recommend all adults get in about 3 servings a day. So right there, you're getting in nearly 400 milligrams, keeping in mind you only need 500 milligrams for the day. A serving of bread or cereal will average about 140 to 200 milligrams of sodium. So if you take in 4 servings of bread or cereal, right there you're going to be getting in close to 600 to 800 milligrams more. And then fresh meat will provide you about 120. So you can see that easily you're getting over 1,000 milligrams just by eating the minimum servings, and most people will be eating more servings than that. So most of the sodium in our diet does come from eating processed and restaurant foods. About 3/4 of our sodium actually comes from processed and restaurant foods. About 12% comes from the food naturally, like we talked about. Milk has the sodium in it naturally. And then the salt that we add at the table or in cooking adds another 11%. So we want you to slice those out and again, stop cooking with salt and adding it at the table. And then let's talk about some of the processed foods. So again, a busy pie chart here, but if you just look at the right side of the chart starting at the noon position of a clock, you'll see that yeast breads provide the most sodium of all American diets, and that's about 7%. But the top 10 sources of sodium comes from things such as yeast bread, your mixed dishes such as casseroles where you might be adding soups or using processed box foods, things such as pizza, your pasta dishes, Cold cuts, salami, bolognese, hot dogs, those are all very high in sodium. Condiments, and we'll be talking about each of these individually, but condiments besides table salt add up quickly. And then any of your ethnic foods, such as your Hispanic food dishes, and then finally sausage, hot dogs, bacon, and processed meats. So if we know that sodium is not healthy for us to eat in excessive amounts, why is it added to so many foods? So first of all, it's added to enhance flavors. I'll share with you a quick story. There was a major food company that makes soups, and about 8 years ago, they decided to get on the healthy bandwagon. They decreased the sodium in their soups by 30%, and within a short amount of time, they were flooded with phone calls from the customer service lines about people complaining about the flavor of food. So Americans do like salt, and they do sometimes demand that salty flavor. So that is one of the reasons manufacturers add it. The second reason is that sodium is essential for yeast breads to strengthen the dough product. So if any of you have baked bread, you know that you have a little bit of yeast, you add some sugar to that, you add some liquid, and all of that brings that yeast alive, and it begins to form air pockets, and that causes the bread to rise. If salt is not added, yeast continues to grow, the bread begins to grow, and so you'll get a very coarse product that has big, coarse structures. And so if you add salt, that kind of kills off the yeast at a certain point, and that keeps that bread soft and perfect. And the third thing that I want you to remember about why sodium is added to food is that it is added to so many foods simply for preservative reasons. And so I want to remind you as we kind of go through the slides that are coming up that anything that can stay in your refrigerator longer than approximately 3 to 5 days probably has excessive amounts of sodium in it. So for an example, if you would have a hot dog, you could keep that in your refrigerator longer than 3 to 5 days, and the main reason is that sodium is so high in it, it is one of the preservatives that keeps that in your refrigerator longer. However, if you'd have fresh ground beef or fresh turkey or fresh raw chicken, you couldn't keep that in your refrigerator longer than 3 to 5 days without it starting to turn bad on you. So again, keep in mind, sodium is a preservative in very many foods. So the next little quiz that I want you to think through is, many people think that if you are following a low sodium diet, they ask, is it better to use sea salt or Himalayan pink salt or kosher salt instead of simply using table salt? So right now, kind of think in your mind if you think, is that true or false? So it is false that Himalayan salt, sea salt is better. So although it's marketed sometimes as being healthier, all forms of salt consist of 2 minerals, sodium and chloride, and so therefore all forms of salt impact your body almost the same. The only difference is where they are derived from. So as you can see in this picture here, it's a picture of a salt mine where we get the table salt is mined from, and that is simply mined and then processed to eliminate some of the trace minerals, and then an anti-caking substance is using so it doesn't clog up in your little salt shaker. But in general, that is where it comes from. It's a very natural source. If you compare that to sea salt or Himalayan salt, they simply are derived from a different location. And as you can see, here's a guy that is harvesting the sea salt. So simply that has trace amounts of other minerals in it, which gives it a little different color perhaps, a little bit different flavor. Texture's a little bit different just because it's processed different. But in general, the key point to remember is salt regardless of its source. So whether it comes from sea salt, whether it's kosher salt or table salt, your body will still use it and it will have the same impacts that it would have as if it was table salt. So what is the best way to determine how much sodium you are getting in? So one of the best tools is to look at the labels on your food. And so I want to kind of refresh with you a little bit about some of the different terms that you might see on food labels so that you can identify if any of the labels are better for you than not. So the first thing that you might see on a label is something might say salt-free or sodium-free. And if it does say that, then it is guaranteed that it would be very low in sodium for any of you folks with heart failure, because by the FDA standards, that means it's less than 5 milligrams of sodium per serving. However, if it says low sodium, that means that the product has less than 140 milligrams per serving. So still pretty low, remembering that you get in that range of 2,000 to 2,500 milligrams of sodium per day. However, the two catchy terms that I want you to be a little bit cautious about is if you see something that says simply reduced sodium or light in sodium, those are terms that does not guarantee it's necessarily going to be lower in sodium. And the reason being is by FDA standards, reduced sodium simply means that the food is 25% lower in sodium than their original product. And if it says light, it means that it's simply only 50% or half the sodium than the original item. So let me give you an idea of why that might not be a good idea for you. If you would have soy sauce, 1 tablespoon of soy sauce generally averages 900 to 1,000 milligrams of sodium. Half of your day, right? But if you go with the light sodium, it still has 600 milligrams of sodium. So that's still pretty high considering that that's almost a third of your day. So again, the best tool is to simply look at the back of the food label where it says the nutrition facts. And on the nutrition facts, the first thing that you should look up at the top where the 2 arrows are is what is the serving size. So you have to be a detective here when you are looking at labels. So the very first thing that you look at is the serving size again. So you can see here on the left side, this is the label from a regular soup of can of soup. And on the left side, the label says 1 cup is the serving size. Now let's compare that to the soup label on the right side where it says a reduced sodium soup. And on the right side, you can see again that the serving size is exactly the same, 1 cup. So we're comparing apples to apples here, and that's what we want to make sure we're doing. So going down to the second arrow towards the bottom, you will see highlighted in yellow the sodium content. And on the left side of the regular soup can, you can see the 1 cup provides 795 milligrams. In contrast, the reduced sodium soup on the right, highlighted in yellow, has only 220 milligrams. So you can see there is a big difference. Now, one other teaching point of the nutrition facts is not only that very first line under the serving size tells you what they recommend as the serving size, but right underneath that tells you how many servings are available in that whole can or that whole box of what the item is that you're eating. So if you eat the whole entire container, and here it says 2 servings, then you would multiply all of that sodium by 2. So again, as an example, on the left side under the nutrition facts, 795 for 1 cup, but if you ate the whole container or had 2 cups, that would be multiplied, and that would almost be 1,600 milligrams of sodium. So again, not only pay attention to the serving size, but what portion you are eating and then how much sodium is in that. So the next item that we're going to discuss is a little bit about when you are going on a low sodium diet. Most people do notice the huge taste difference, and people complain that there's no taste in the food anymore, and it's difficult for them to follow the meal plan at the beginning. And so I want to assure you that is normal. Most Americans have been raised to learn to like salt. It is not a learned taste that we normally are born with. And in fact, they've done studies in children and in infants, and they've offered them low sodium products, salty products, and sugary products. And almost every little infant or toddler prefers sugary. So we know that sugar is a taste that most humans do prefer. But salty foods are not really preferred until the child has been exposed to it time after time after time, and then they begin to learn to like salt. So likewise, most of us adults have to unlearn that taste and give our taste buds a chance to adapt to the flavor of food without salt. So research has shown that it does take a minimum of 4 weeks for your taste buds to acclimate to that low sodium diet. And we're going to be talking about different ways that you can season your foods to kind of give it flavor without that salt. So again, bear with it. stay with that low sodium diet. It may take a good 4 weeks or even sometimes 2 months, but eventually you will learn that salt is too salty for you. In fact, just to kind of give you a little idea, I grew up where my mom cooked with salt. We added lots of salt. And then when I learned about the impact of sodium on health, I stopped using it about 10 years ago. I no longer can even stand to eat a dill pickle anymore. That just tastes too salty to me. So again, eventually you will adapt. So earlier we talked about 75% of the Americans' sodium intake is coming from hidden sources of food or processed food. So let's talk a little bit about where you might have some of those hidden sources of sodium. So first of all, going through the bread groups, you'll notice that an average bagel, that's kind of a larger one that you might get from a bagel shop, can average about 500 milligrams, and in fact some can be higher than that. The smaller ones that you might get, just at the grocery store, those can be about 300 to 400 milligrams. So again, bread products can add up quickly if you eat them frequently throughout the day. If you're going to have bread, generally white or wheat bread still will average 120 to 200 milligrams of sodium. However, there are some that are completely sodium free. One brand is called Ezekiel bread, has no sodium in it, and again, you would have to find that in the freezer section. The reason being is we talked about sodium is somewhat of a preservative. So if you buy bread that is low sodium, generally it will mold faster on you unless you keep it refrigerated or frozen. So again, it is out there, but I do want to tell you on a 2,000 to 2,500 milligram sodium meal plan, it's not necessary to have to buy sodium-free bread unless you are eating bread all day long. So again, it is not necessary, but it is available. Something that a lot of people are very surprised about is that there is a big difference in sodium intake when they compare flour tortillas to corn tortillas. An average flour tortilla can range from 230 to 400 milligrams, whereas a corn tortilla generally only has 40 to 60 milligrams. So again, we're not saying you can't have the flour tortilla, but if you eat a couple of wraps in a day, in there at the upper range of that 400, it can add up quickly. So corn tortillas would be much better if you eat many of those. So moving on from the bread products, let's talk a little bit about hidden sodium in meats. And we always talk about fresh is always preferred. If you have fresh chicken that you get straight from the deli department or the butcher, that's only going to have about 40 milligrams for 3 ounces. 3 ounces looks about the size of a palm of a woman's hand or about a deck of cards. So again, very low, but if you have any processed meat, such as a hot dog, that's going to run you about 400 to 600 milligrams. And then any meats that have been brined, such as your ham, your corned beef, those are going to run you over 1,000 milligrams for that small 3 ounce portion that would in chicken or fish only provide 40 milligrams. So again, remember, unprocessed meats are going to be your lowest in sodium, but anything that says on the label smoked, cured, or if it comes from the deli or in a can, it's going to be much higher in sodium. So let's look at deli meats. A lot of times people will go to the deli department and say, well, I just got roast beef or I got some turkey there. But keep in mind, many of the deli meats are very high in sodium because it is going to be added to keep the food from preserved better. So for example, 2 ounces of roast beef would only be about 410 milligrams, but you can get at many of the grocery stores a brand called Boar's Head if you request it, and it is low sodium at about 80 milligrams. Pastrami and ham are going to run you over 600 milligrams just for 2 thin slices of it. Again, turkey generally, if it's freshly cooked up, it will be very low, but if it's been smoked or brined, it will run you close to 500. Again, at some of the bigger deli departments, such as some of the Hy-Vee stores, for example, you can ask for the low sodium deli turkey, and some of that can be as low as 55 milligrams. So another teaching point is sodium is actually injected in many poultry and fish products simply because those meats are generally a little bit leaner, and when they're a little bit leaner, they are a little bit drier. So To plump them up, some of the food manufacturers are injecting them with sodium to enhance them. And so you might find, for example, if you look at some of your cheaper chicken breast or turkey breast, it might say that's been injected or enhanced with broth, and so we want to avoid that. Some of the specific brands that you will find again at the larger grocery stores, such as Smart Chicken, and some of them are much lower in sodium. So again, you do have to look at the packaging, even on the meat that is in the meat department. And here's an example of a label from a turkey breast. And as you can see, the arrow is pointing to the line that says contains up to 7% of a solution to enhance juiciness. And in smaller print right below that, if you can see, it says water and salt. And so again, that has been injected into that turkey breast to give it a little bit more flavor and a little bit more juiciness. So do be aware that that can be added. So again, comparing some of the meats, 3 ounces of ham, very high, 1,300 milligrams, so that is not recommended for most of you folks who have heart failure. Turkey, again, if you can get it unsalted and get it fresh, that can be as low as 50 milligrams. And again, many of this local places I know here in Omaha, such as Stoysich, around the holidays, you can call ahead and order your fresh turkeys that have not been injected. And then at the very bottom is your prime rib. It's going to provide you about 350 to 500 milligrams if it has the au juice, because the au juice is going to be full of sodium, as most broths are. So now we're going to move on to the next food groups, and we're going to talk about vegetables. And just like we talked about with the meats, fresh is always the best. So for example, if you're going to buy some fresh vegetables from the store, or if you happen to have some in your own gardens, 1 cup, which is about a fistful, is about 25 to 50 milligrams of sodium. However, if you compare that to canned vegetables, 1 cup will run you anywhere from 200 to up to 860 milligrams for simply 1 cup portion. However, you can buy some of the canned vegetables with the no salt added, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit, and those have almost as little amount of sodium as fresh vegetables do. However, anything that's been brined, such as your sauerkraut, your dill pickles, and your green olives, are going to be excessively high in sodium. So once again, these are products we do not recommend people with heart failure to eat very often, if at all. If you absolutely are craving a little tiny flavor of pickle, maybe just take one of those little slices that looks kind of like a quarter size, and 1 or 2 of those at the most, because 1 average dill pickle will run you close to 600 to 900 milligrams. So again, looking at the vegetable labels, as I talked about, you can see on the left side of your PowerPoint slide here, there is the no added salt vegetables. On the right side is your regular vegetables. And these come in many brands, your Green Giant, your Hy-Vee brand, your Our Family brand. So again, at the very top under the nutrition facts, as we talked about, that's the very first thing you should always look at is the serving size. So 1/2 cup on each of those will show you the difference. So on the left side, the arrow is pointing to the sodium content. 1/2 cup provides 20 milligrams of sodium and the no salt added. On the right side is the regular green beans, and the 1/2 cup, as you can see, the arrow is pointing to the sodium, is 290 milligrams. So that makes a huge difference if you can start purchasing the no salt added, whether it's green beans, whether it's peas, corn, tomatoes, tomato paste, tomato sauce. That all comes in the no salt added versions. So the next question many people ask me is, well, can't I just go ahead and buy the regular vegetables and drain and rinse them? So I'm going to ask you to kind of think through draining and rinsing them. Do you think that can reduce the sodium by 20 to 30%, by 50%, or do you think you can get almost 100% of that sodium out by draining and rinsing your vegetables? And the answer is only 20 to 30%. The research has been done in many food labs where they put the canned vegetables in a colander, rinsed it for 2 minutes of running water, and they were only able to rinse out 20 to 30%, and that's with 2 minutes of rinsing it. So that helps reduce it somewhat, but it's not preferred for you folks with heart failure. It's better to go ahead and buy either fresh, frozen, or the canned ones that have no salt added. So again, you can see just by rinsing a dill pickle, you'll never be able to rinse the interior of that salt out that's in the core of it. Okay, so now moving on to the dairy products, you can see that an 8-ounce serving of milk, which is a portion size that we recommend, contains about 125 milligrams of sodium. One little container of yogurt, which is about 6-ounce portion, contains 50 to 75 milligrams. So milk is pretty low, dairy products are pretty low, and again, I will remind you the milk, it's not added to it. That sodium is in there naturally, straight from the cow. So again, you should be getting 3 servings of dairy in a day, and again, milk and yogurt is fairly low. However, if you start to use cheese as your dairy servings, then the sodium begins to add up quite quickly. So 1 ounce, which is the slice about equated with Velveeta, that's been, or American cheese that's been pre-sliced, you can see 1 ounce serving is going to provide approximately 390 milligrams of sodium for Parmesan. I'm not going to go through this whole slide, but just to remind you, this second and third on the list are processed cheeses. Your American cheese has about 300 milligrams per slice. Velveeta has about 350 milligrams. So try to stay away from those processed cheeses as much as possible. And again, try to go mostly with the cheeses that are more naturally aged. So for example, your cheddar cheese, your Swiss cheese is actually the lowest of all at about 110 milligrams. And then the baby Swiss, and the Swiss is the lowest of all. Okay, so now we're going to review condiments because that's where a lot of the hidden sources of sodium can be. So you can see a tablespoon of ketchup will provide you nearly 200 milligrams of sodium. If you're a fan of ketchup and you use lots of it, I would highly suggest that you look for the low sodium brands, such as Hunt's and Heinz, and some of those provide some that provide less than 25 milligrams of sodium per tablespoon. Also, any salad dressings can add up quickly. The creamier dressings, such as your ranch dressing, for example, will provide about 200 milligrams just for a tablespoon. And most research shows that the average American takes 3 to 4 tablespoons of dressing per salad. So easily, you could be taking in about 800 milligrams of sodium just by eating a salad with some dressing. However, some of the vinaigrettes, such as there's a Vidalia brand out there, a raspberry vinaigrette that provides only 1 tablespoon for 40 milligrams. So also making your own dressing, such as vinegar and oil. Vinegar has very little sodium. Oil has no sodium at all. So again, you can make your own and flavor it up with some Italian seasoning, some garlic powder, and you can have some very low sodium dressings by making it yourself. And as we talked about earlier, one of the condiments that's the highest is soy sauce at about 1,000 to 1,300 milligrams per tablespoon. So again, that's just a warning that if you're eating any Asian food, such as Japanese or Chinese or Thai food, that those are going to be excessively high. We don't recommend those simply because they can have easily 2,000 to 2,500 milligrams of sodium for 1 serving. So how do we add flavor if we're going to be taking flavor away with the salt? So as I said, you will learn to acclimate your taste buds by eating different seasonings in your foods. For example, any herbs or any powders are completely sodium free. In Omaha, Nebraska here we have a Penzi spice store that has over 12 salt-free blends that you can purchase. If you don't have access and you're in a smaller city listening to this, you can purchase things such as Mrs. Dash at the local grocery store. Or you can simply just use your own herbs and powders, garlic, parsley, thyme, dill, any of those. Now, in regards to salt substitutes, the only time you can use a salt substitute is if your physician has approved it. And the reason being is salt substitutes provide potassium, which is normally increased in some people who have issues with kidney disease. So again, if you have had any issues with your potassium being elevated, you cannot use a salt substitute. Another source is, if you are good at ordering things online, is to go to the website for mrspice.com. And again, here's Mrs. Dash. You can see that she has right now, she currently has about 10 different flavors. Some of them are like a chipotle kind of spicy one. There's a table blend. There's a chicken one. So there's much to choose from in that line of products. And here is the Mr. Spice that you can order online. Again, as you can see, the blue arrow at the very top is pointing to the sodium content, and all of his sauces have 0 milligrams of sodium. So there's all kinds. There's barbecue sauce, which can add up quite quickly. Some barbecue sauces for 1 tablespoon is over 200 milligrams. So he has a honey barbecue one that has none. There's hot wing ones, sweet and sour, Thai peanut. So if you want to eat Asian, you can use some of his products to give that Asian flair without the soy sauce. And again, this is just one of his products to show you the barbecue sauce has only 5 milligrams actually in a serving of his barbecue sauce. And then again, just as a reminder, anytime you are cooking, anything that ends in salt is a form of salt. So seasoning salt, garlic salt, onion salt are all forms of salt that you need to get rid of and change to the powdered forms, such as garlic powder or onion powder. Other seasonings can be vinegar. Vinegar can flavor foods quite nicely, as well as lemon juice, hot sauces in moderation. All of those can add good flavoring. And again, if you live close to the Omaha area, in the Rockbrook Shopping Center here, there are 2 centers that you can buy flavored oils and vinegars. And one of them is called Old World Oil and Vinegar, and the other is the Savory Spice Shop. So you can see here the vinegars come in different flavors. You can get peach, you can get orange, you can even get chocolate flavored ones. So that's a great way to make some of your own marinades, some of your own salad dressings as well. Another thing that I want to point out to you is that when you see the term fat-free, that does not equate with sodium-free, and a lot of people confuse that. So as you can see, here's a product of fat-free gravy, and the serving size, as you can see at the top, is 1/4 of a cup. An average person probably uses twice that, 1/2 of a cup. So for 1/4 of a cup, the sodium, as you can see, there's the arrow to denote that it has 290 milligrams for 1/4 of a cup. And again, if you used 1/2 of a cup, you'd have to multiply that. You would be taking in about 600 milligrams just from the fat-free gravy. The other thing that I want to alert you is anything in a boxed mix is going to oftentimes be way too high in sodium for folks with heart failure. So again, looking at the box of macaroni and cheese here, you can see the serving size is a cup and the sodium is about 600 milligrams. So what I like to kind of recommend is, if you are following that 2,000 to 2,500 milligrams of sodium, don't save up all of your sodium and eat it at 1 meal. That's a big rush of sodium for your body. It's better to divide it throughout the day and eat it in 3 meals. So that way you get about 600 to 700 milligrams per meal and a little bit added for a snack here and there. So as you can see, that 1 cup of macaroni and cheese here is almost 600. That would be your whole sodium content for that meal. If you ate, again, 2 cups, which many people might do, then you would be getting in over half your day at 1,200. So again, really watch the labels on any boxed products. Here's another example of stovetop stuffing. Again, 1/2 of a cup. Once it's made up, it has about 400 milligrams. So watch your portions. If you are going to moderate it and keep it to 1/2 of a cup, that could be doable. However, there's ways to lighten it up. So instead of using the stovetop, just get your own dried breadcrumbs, and you can purchase any of the flavorings of broth in chicken or beef, and it does all come in not only low sodium, but more importantly, unsalted. And so that way you can make your own gravies, your own stuffing mixes without adding all the sodium. Now, the last group that we're going to zero in on is your snacks. And a lot of people right away think that they're going to be told not to eat any chips at all. So I do want to alert you, while I'm not recommending that chips are healthy, there is some that are healthier for you. So as you can kind of see at the upper left hand here of the slide, One of the salt and vinegar potato chips provides you 340 milligrams for an ounce. And an ounce is only about 15 potato chips. So again, that can add up quickly if you're eating a couple of handfuls of it. So in general, chips are going to run you close to about 200 to 300 milligrams for about 10 to 15 chips. However, at the very bottom, you can see some of the chips that are much lower in sodium. On the lower left is the Lay's, that's the lightly salted, has about 90 milligrams per serving. On the far right, you can see there's some that are completely almost salt-free that have 5 milligrams. So again, do some detective work when you're at the grocery store, and you can find almost all products in a lower sodium or salt-free version. Popcorn is another one that can add up quickly. Here's a Skinny Pop that is a light sodium one. And as you can see, this is an individual snack bag, so this would be a good snack for you. Again, the whole bag contains only 60 milligrams of sodium. Or you can pop your own again and just not add the salt. Salted popcorn can add up quickly, so do get the low sodium versions or make it yourself without any added salts. And then finally, let's talk a little bit about eating out. And as a dietitian, you know, eating out can be dangerous if you don't do your homework ahead of time. But I get it. I mean, most of us at one time or another are in a hurry, or we might be craving once in a while a fast food place. So the idea is to do the research and be aware that many of the products can be excessively high. To give you an example, here in this slide, you can see a Burger King Whopper with cheese will be all about 1,500 milligrams. That's 3/4 of your day there. The fish fillet, that sounds like it might be healthy, is about 1,400. And again, remember, anything that has a breading on it, such as that fish fillet or a breaded chicken sandwich, is going to be very high in sodium because of that breading. However, even the grilled chicken sandwich, you can see, is about 1,300 milligrams. Once again, that goes back to the earlier slides where they are injecting some of that chicken with some sodium to keep it moister. You can see a slice of average pizza will run you about 700 milligrams. And if it's, you know, the thick crust meat lovers with all of the salty sausage on it, pepperoni on it, could run you up to 1,000 milligrams per slice. Here's a Subway roasted chicken sandwich. That's 1,000. And again, the chicken, once again, is going to have some of that sodium injected in it. Then you will also have the bread that will add up quickly. Panera's, a lot of people go there thinking it's fresh food, it's very healthy, but again, soups at almost any place that you go adds up quickly. 1 cup of soup at almost every restaurant will be approximately 900 to 1,000 milligrams. If you get a whole bowl full, you're getting almost 2,000. So, but you'll notice at the bottom, just the plain hamburger at most of the fast foods is 530 milligrams. So there are healthier choices. So generally, whenever you can get just the plain hamburger without the pickles, without, you know, any of the extra salty stuff, you're going to be probably choosing the lightest sodium item there. So tips for eating out is, first of all, do your research before you go to eat out. If you know that you're going to be traveling or going to eat out, request the nutrition facts if you are there at the store. In fact, the FDA requires if there's a branch or the chain that has more than 22 branches of it, then they have to provide you upon request in the store the nutrition analysis of their menus. If not, or if you want to just do it at home, just Google it and look up. Any restaurant will also be listed. Second, when you get to the restaurant, request foods to be prepared without added salt. So for example, if you have to have the French fries, request that no salt be added. Third, as we talked about, anything that has breading on it. So your fried fish, your fried chicken sandwiches, that will also add up for extra sodium, so get the plain grilled ones. And request no extra sauce on it. That's where the sauce can actually provide a lot more sodium to the food. And finally, if you're going to be eating salads, request the vinegar and oil, or some of my folks even simply just bring it with them, the low sodium ones from home. So again, if you would look up the menus, some of the more moderate sodium and fast food would be the plain hamburgers. If you're going to Subway, the Veggie Delight's $2.80, the oven roasted chicken is $5.60 at Subway. And if you're going to taco places, the plain taco averages only about 330. So if you eat 2 of them, that's pretty much, you're done, and then you just fill up the rest of your meal with fruit or fresh veggies like some carrot sticks and an apple. So as we come to the end of the presentation, I do want to remind you one of the healthiest diets for everybody is the Mediterranean diet. And that's a healthy model for all of us. So when people say, well, what can I eat? You will be surprised that if you follow the Mediterranean diet, you're going to be following less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. And this is what it is derived from. Lots of fruits and vegetables. So again, half of your plate as fruit and vegetables, especially the fresh ones. Again, a couple servings of the low-fat dairy products, such as your milk and your yogurts. Plenty of unsalted nuts and low sodium meats, and then up to 6 whole grains in a day, and that is a very healthy meal plan. So as we finish this, my advice is do not take anything with a grain of salt. Thank you and have a good day.